Hi, and welcome to another presentation from your business tutor, learning your way, anytime, anywhere. If you ask somebody if they want to live in a fair, equal and just society, the vast majority of people reply with a resounding yes. However, as self-evident as that response is, history tells us that such societies very rarely form naturally. In fact, it would be fair to suggest that even in a developed society such as the UK, that discrimination, bias and intolerance still exist. This is why this presentation on human resource legislation is so important, because it is through the legal system that such prejudiced views can be challenged and hopefully eliminated. So what are we going to learn in this presentation? Well, first of all, we're going to find out about the features of current HR legislation, and then we're going to explore the impact of HR legislation on organisations. Okay, let's get started with our first question, which is, what is human resource legislation? Human resource legislation refers to all the laws passed by government on workplace employment and covers areas such as discrimination, pay, contracts of employment and health and safety. In short, these laws set out the legal minimum standard which all organisations operating in the UK must meet if they are not to break the law. So with that, let's look at our first piece of employment legislation and ask, what is the Equality Act? The Equality Act is an anti-discrimination law which merged together and strengthened previous legislation passed over the last 50 years into a single, comprehensive law that protects individuals against discrimination and promotes equality of opportunity for all. How it does this is by making it illegal to discriminate against anybody based on certain characteristics they may have. For example, under the law, 9 protected characteristics have been identified which cannot be used to treat someone unfairly or differently to anybody else. These protected characteristics are age, disability, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion or belief, pregnancy or maternity, marriage or civil partnership, and gender reassignment. And as you can see, given everyone possesses at least one of these protected characteristics, the Equality Act defends everyone from unfair treatment. However, as well as defining what personal characteristics cannot be discriminated against, the Equality Act also outlines methods of discrimination which are illegal. For example, where an individual is treated less favourably than someone else because they hold a protected characteristic, such as being told they haven't got a job because they are gay, this is called direct discrimination. Whereas when someone with a protected characteristic is disadvantaged because of a certain rule or procedure, this is called indirect discrimination. For example, if a job advert stated only people under 5 foot tall can apply, men would be disadvantaged compared to women. Further still, unwanted behaviour related to a protected characteristic, for example, a man commenting on a woman's figure or touching her inappropriately, is also illegal and is defined as harassment. And finally, treating an individual unfairly because they have complained about discrimination or harassment, for example, calling a person a snitch because they have made a complaint, is called victimisation and is also illegal. Now, as you can see, the Equality Act is incredibly wide-ranging, meaning there is no excuse for behaviour or actions which are discriminatory. Even so, in a small number of cases where an organisation or an individual has been unwilling to change their behaviour, the Equality and Human Rights Commission can investigate and then take court action to enforce the provisions of the Equality Act are adhered to. This is a really important point, because what this shows is that an organisation cannot just pay lip service to the Equality Act. It must take action and put in place measures to ensure it fully complies with the law. So let's look at that by asking, what is the impact of the Equality Act on organisations? One of the main impacts of the Equality Act is that an organisation must put in place measures that ensure whenever they need to make a choice between people or make a decision about a member of staff, that this is done in a fair and equal way. For example, when it comes to recruitment and selection, a business must be able to show it has acted in a non-discriminatory way. This could include removing all references to protected characteristics such as age, gender or sexual orientation in documents used in the process. For example, job adverts should not state only male applicants over 35 should apply, and an application form should not ask questions such as whether you are married or whether you are pregnant or not. This of course also holds for the interview as well, where no assumptions about a candidate's capacity to do a job should be made based on a protected characteristic, such as disability. In fact, under the provisions of the Equality Act, an employer is expected to make reasonable adjustments to ensure disabled candidates are not disadvantaged. For example, paying for ramp access to be added to a building so that wheelchair users can attend interview. As can be seen, given the potential for discrimination during the recruitment and selection process, it is vital that a business not only follows its own policies, but also that they take and then store notes on why certain candidates were chosen over others, so that if an issue is raised, evidence can be provided to show why an appointment was made. However, the impact of the Equality Act is not just restricted to recruitment and selection. Other areas such as training, promotion, redundancy and pay are also affected. For example, under the Act, all organisations with over 250 employees must publish annually their gender pay gap, which obviously could create some negative press if it was worsening rather than improving over time. Further still, to avoid employee complaints, an organisation should also put in place regular training for its staff so that everyone knows what protected characteristics, discrimination, harassment and victimisation are. Although this may be costly to do, it should save money in the long term as breaches of the Equality Act are avoided. Nevertheless, as much as an organisation will want to avoid breaches, it also has to be aware that issues can still arise, and therefore policies and procedures will have to be developed so that employees can make complaints. For example, if an employee feels they are being treated unfairly, they must be able to raise a complaint using their organisation's Grievance Procedure. This should lead to a thorough investigation of the complaint, and if evidence of discrimination is found, appropriate disciplinary action should be taken against those found guilty, and prompt remedial action put in place to prevent it happening again. Of course, if an organisation fails to comply with all or parts of the Equality Act, the consequences can be severe, in that the Equality and Human Rights Commission can take them to court with the result that they could face an unlimited fine or face being convicted. As this demonstrates, trying to ignore the Equality Act is a dangerous pursuit and in fact counterproductive. This is because organisations that embrace equality don't just have access to a far greater pool of talent, but will end up with a more diverse workforce which supports a business's image and helps attract customers and employees. Okay, let's now move on to another piece of workplace legislation and ask, what is the Health and Safety at Work Act? The Health and Safety at Work Act is the UK's premier piece of legislation on safety, health and welfare in the workplace. It sets out a wide range of duties and responsibilities that employers have in terms of ensuring health and safety, not only of their own employees, but also anybody else impacted by their workplace, for example, customers. As such, under the Act, an employer must ensure their machinery and equipment is not only safe to use, but also regularly maintained. More than that though, they must also provide training to employees so they can carry out their work safely and ensure, where necessary, that supervision is in place when dangerous work is being carried out. This would particularly be the case if dangerous substances or equipment were being used. As you would expect, in such circumstances, an employer will not only be required to provide the safety equipment and clothing needed by employees to carry out such tasks in a safe way, but also ensure adequate signage is displayed around the workplace, detailing areas where health and safety dangers exist. However, signage in itself is not enough. An organisation must also maintain its workplace by keeping it clean, tidy and free of avoidable risks. For example, ensuring inventory is stored safely and that walkways in the workplace are not slippery. As you would expect, given the number of responsibilities an employer has, they must create a written health and safety policy which details how they will meet their duties and obligations. Moreover, given the importance of this policy, it should not only be shared with employees periodically, but also regularly updated based on risk assessments undertaken by the business. Nevertheless, and this is one of the major strengths of this legislation, health and safety in the workplace is a dual responsibility, in that it is not only an employer who is responsible, but also employees as well. For example, under the Act, employees must follow the safety instructions and training they have been given by their employer when carrying out their job. But also, they must carry out their job with reasonable care and not put themselves or others at risk through carelessness or dangerous behaviour. And finally, they must cooperate with and follow organisational procedures put in place to ensure the Health and Safety at Work Act is met. For example, in terms of maintaining a safe working environment, an employee would be expected to report any issues they felt could cause a health and safety issue. For example, a water spillage on a walkway or boxes of inventory unsafely stored. Now, as with the Equality Act, a regulatory body called the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, has been set up to enforce the Health and Safety at Work Act, but also to provide advice and assistance to help organisations improve safety in their workplaces. As such, there is no excuse for breaching the law. However, should an organisation do so, it will be investigated and potentially face prosecution. What this shows, and this is a vital point, health and safety is an ongoing requirement which affects organisations every single day. So let's look at that by asking, what is the impact of the Health and Safety at Work Act on organisations? As has already been indicated, a business must create a written health and safety policy document which details how it will meet its responsibilities under the Act. Although creating such a document takes time, the real challenge that arises is actually implementing the policy and hence the law. For example, under the policy, the business will have to keep not only a record of all accidents in an accident book, but in the case of serious injuries, diseases or dangerous occurrences, will have to report them to the Health and Safety Executive, who may then decide to investigate the incident themselves and in some instances fine and prosecute the organisation for breaches of the law. Further still, the organisation will also have to complete and hold risk assessments for all the work and activities undertaken by its employees, so that any dangers can be minimised. And of course, if this process is to be done effectively, a business should consult with its employees, as they are in the best position to identify potential dangers in the work they do. However, if new tasks are being risk assessed, a business may have to bring in an outside health and safety expert, which of course could be expensive. In fact, risk assessing tasks can mean that changes need to be made to the way products are made, which can also increase costs and reduce output. Moreover, as an organisation's health and safety policy should be a working document that keeps abreast of all changes in safety regulations and relevant advice from the health and safety executive, it can be seen that from a time and administrative perspective, that maintaining the policy can be very demanding. Nevertheless, and this is a key point, since the inception of the Health and Safety at Work Act, fatal and non-fatal injuries in the workplace have dropped significantly. Of course, this is not just down to following a policy, but also because organisations are spending money on purchasing safer equipment, maintaining it and training employees to use it so that workplaces are safer. However, although such costs can be significant, it should not be underestimated what effect working in a safe environment where employees receive high quality training has on staff motivation and hence productivity. Furthermore, if an organisation does not do these things, the consequences in terms of fines and legal prosecution can be huge, and in some instances can result in an organisation being closed down. And finally, given health and safety is a dual responsibility, an organisation may need to take disciplinary action against staff who have failed to follow appropriate procedures. In fact, if it is found an employee's breach of health and safety is significant, it could result in their dismissal from the business. Okay, let's now move on to look at our final piece of workplace legislation and ask, what is the National Minimum Wage Act? The National Minimum Wage Act is a law that sets the legal minimum an employee can be paid per hour by an organisation and is based on age and experience. For example, in terms of experience, there is a rate for apprentices in their first year of training, after which they then move on to the 4 rates based on age. One for under 18s, one for 18 to 20-year-olds, one for 21 to 24-year-olds, and a final one termed the National Living Wage Rate for those aged over 25. As you'd expect, these rates are increased annually by the government passing National Minimum Wage and National Living Wage regulations through Parliament. Now, although most organisations will pay their workers according to the rate set, some may choose not to, and if this is the case, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, HMRC, is responsible for investigating these businesses and, if underpayment is found, serving them with a notice to not only pay their workers correctly, but also to make back payments for the period over which employees were underpaid. Of course, in situations where serious or deliberate underpayment is found, a business may also be fined and face court action. Okay, let's now go on to look at the impact of the National Minimum Wage Act on organisations. Probably the biggest impact on an organisation is the rising costs caused by the annual increase in rates payable to those employees on the minimum wage. This can be a big problem because if a business has a lot of employees on the minimum wage, its costs will rise a lot, meaning its profits may fall. In fact, if a business is trying to compete internationally, it may find it harder to do so if its competitors from other countries are not facing the same rise in wage costs that they are. As such, some UK-based organisations may consider either reducing the number of staff they employ, or alternatively decide to relocate abroad in order to reduce costs caused by rises in the minimum wage. On the other hand, increases in the minimum wage can also have a positive effect, in that if staff are paid more, they will be more motivated and productive. And finally, as indicated previously, companies that do not comply with national minimum wage regulations will not only be investigated and, if found guilty, made to make backdated payments to their employees, but in more severe cases of deliberate underpayment can be fined and prosecuted. As you would expect, having to make backdated payments will have a negative effect on an organisation's profits, but also a business's image, especially if underpaying employees was a deliberate act. Okay, so what did we learn in this presentation? Well, first of all, we found out about the features of human resource legislation, and then we went on to explore the impact of human resource legislation on organisations. Although it is 50 years since the Equal Pay Act was passed in 1970, there are still situations where men, women and minorities are paid unequally for doing the same job. Likewise, there are still workplaces where discrimination exists and where workers operate in an unsafe and dangerous environment. Nevertheless, this does not mean that human resource legislation should be abandoned, because examples of workplace discrimination, unequal pay and unsafe working practices have all statistically reduced over the last 50 years. As such, the aim of employment legislation must not only be improved compliance, but also a strengthening of those laws to ensure they cannot be ignored, avoided or undermined by unscrupulous organisations.